Hey folks, so I haven't made a video in a long time, and I wanted to do a quick book review for you for this one, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible by Charles Eisenstein. Now this book is a recent publication by North Atlantic Press. Um, if you're not familiar with Charles Eisenstein, he's done a lot of writing on the website Reality Sandwich. He is the author of Sacred Economics and The Ascent of Humanity. The latter of which is apparently very popular in online circles, in alternative and intentional communities, and argues for a new way of looking at human society. It sees us as in a transitional age and is trying to articulate this emergent global holistic culture. And Sacred Economics, which was his second to last published book, also made the rounds around the time of Occupy, during a time where we were really trying to, and are continuing to try to, rethink money and economic systems and value. Um, Now, this work is very different than the other two in that it's much shorter. It doesn't hog as much shelf space. Um, and it reads with these little, I don't know how to pronounce it, vignettes. Um, Basically, they're little short chapters organized by topics: separation, breakdown, interbeing, naivety, reality, spirit, doing, non-doing, attention, struggle, pain, judgment, hate, miracle, truth, consciousness, destiny, self-identity. Um, each of these chapters are a couple of pages long. It reads almost like like a good page-turning novel where the chapter is 3 or 4 pages and it moves on to the next part or goes to something else. Um, it's not a page turner exactly, but it is very easy to read. It's a very thoughtful book. Eisenstein's style has always been slower paced. It has always been easily readable, but you have to slow down and really think about what he's saying, and he's encouraging you to do that. It's not complex, it's not difficult to understand, it's not difficult to comprehend. The language is very accessible. Um, so it's the kind of book that you can read and it really gets you to think and reflect on yourself and society, and you can pass it along to friends and family and loved ones, and I think they can get something out of it that maybe the other two books, which are larger, number one, and that's automatically making them less accessible for non-readers or folks who wouldn't normally read a kind of alternative thinking book. Um, and two, the language in this one is refined. The literary style of Eisenstein has really kind of I think developed since his earlier works, been polished, I guess is the better word. This is a book that um, and I thought of doing this for the book review. I just haven't been in the mode for writing recently. I've been getting all of this new podcast software, so it's been much more fun to hop on and talk and be more audible about this work. But this is a book that is in the spirit of, let's say, previous authors like C.S. Lewis, um, and a completely different domain, completely different worldview, I know, but Lewis wrote accessible books for the public about ideas that maybe were counter to his time, that brought a sense of the sacred back into the world, that argued for a religious sensibility, and so on. Maybe G.K. Chesterton is another one, but I'm emphasizing C.S. Lewis because of how publicly oriented he was as a public thinker, as a writer who wrote accessible works, both fiction and nonfiction. He was a good storyteller, and that I think is still one of the most widely read Christian writers in the world. Um, so I think Eisenstein has done something successful with this book in that he's whittled down his arguments into themes, each chapter as a theme, and he goes into each one very carefully, very naturally and very accessibly. Uh, and so the book reads very well, and I do recommend it. And I do recommend that this is a book that if you're going to get a copy, maybe get 2 copies, one for yourself and then one to pass around to your friends. Um, because an equivalent to it would be, let's say, Daniel Quinn's works, which had the same kind of effect. When I was in undergrad, I was reading Ishmael and My Ishmael, and the story of B, and also a nonfiction work on the same topic, Beyond Civilization. And like Charles Eisenstein, Daniel Quinn is saying that the way that we are organizing our mythos, our culture, the story of our civilization isn't working. Um, we're running ourselves to the ground in a sense, and it's important to rethink everything and reflect on everything. Eisenstein is doing the same thing in his own way, and I think it's overlapping with Daniel Quinn's work, which came out in the 90s. But Daniel Quinn's work was another work where you could read it and pass it along to friends, and that's exactly what I did in undergrad. And I even passed it along to professors, and I was pleasantly surprised that some of my philosophy professors took Daniel Quinn's book and they passed it along throughout the school before it got back to me. So other professors read it within the philosophy department before it reached my desk again. Um, so I was really happy about that. I don't know if this will be the kind of book that you can pass along to your philosophy professor, but maybe you could. Again, because of its thoughtfulness and yet its accessible style. Um, but to kind of, I guess, switch gears really quick and just go into some of the meat of the actual text itself. What is it talking about? Well, it's the same things in the same thing as in Eisenstein's other works. It's describing our transitional age. You know, we have the story of the people, and we are in a story of separation, separating us from nature, inside and outside, and so on. This very fragmented style of thought where ideology can be used as an excuse, even for good things, to do bad things in the meanwhile. You know, ends justify the means. Um, he critiques, and this is why I think this book is fresh. Um, he addresses countercultural communities as very often exemplifying the same problems and mode of consciousness that we're trying to get away from, that we're trying to heal from or transform. Um, so that part I really did like, because if you're like me, if you've gotten involved in certain communities, alternative communities, countercultural communities, um, it's just I mean there are exceptions to it, but it is rife with political infighting and power struggles and ranking, and it's a really kind of embarrassing situation when you step out of the bureaucratic mess that is, you know, mainstream business and culture and so on, and you go into these intentional communities, these alternative businesses, thinking like, well, these guys have it together in some sense because they know that our society is broken and they're trying to do something different. So all the more power to them, and I'm glad to work with them. But then you go into them, and they are just as bad, if not worse, than some of the worst traits of you know, corporate cutthroat, power struggle, one-upmanship, infighting, ego, and just there's so much that's wrong apparently with alternative communities where they actually exemplify the worst of our civilization rather than you know, a good alternative. And that's not the case with everything, but it's too often the case. So Eisenstein is addressing that in this book. He's really looking at it, and I wish I could actually um, find you a good. Yeah, yeah. Let me just read this because I'm not going to make this video too long, but just to kind of share with you. So he gives the example from the book 1984, where Winston, the protagonist, if you haven't read it, 1984 is written by George Orwell, and the protagonist, Winston, is rebelling against this totalitarian society that watches everything and controls everything, and he finds this rebel group. Part of the rebel initiation is to basically agree to do any heinous and horrible thing against humanity if it would topple this evil party. And he, asks some questions like, you are prepared to give your lives? Yes. You are prepared to commit murder? Yes. To commit acts of sabotage, which may cause the death of hundreds of innocent people? Yes. To betray your country to foreign powers? Yes. And so on and so on. And then Eisenstein writes, Winston, it is shown, is really no different from the party in putting an abstract and unreachable goal ahead of any means. It is significant that the Brotherhood, which is this rebel group, is phony, a fabrication of the party. It is the party. In the same way, only perhaps more subtly, the social or environmental crusader who sacrifices human values for the cause is no true revolutionary at all, but the opposite, a pillar of the system. We see again and again within environmental organizations, within leftist political groups, the same bullying of underlings, the same power grabs, the same egoic rivalries as we see everywhere else. If these are played out in our organizations, how can we hope that they won't be played out in the world we create should we be victorious? He goes on to add, some groups, recognizing this, devote much of their time to group processes, seeking to implement within their own organizations the egalitarian inclusive goals that they are striving to bring to society. The danger is that the group becomes all about itself and fails to accomplish any external goals. Many Occupy groups experience this tendency. Nonetheless, these efforts to work out new principles of organization and consensus signify a growing realization of the unity of the internal and the external. And this is my favorite part from the book so far, where he says, it isn't simply about demonstrating one's virtue by being egalitarian or inclusive. It is that who we are and how we relate affect what we create. So that sort of is the crux of this book, really. It's who we are and how we relate to each other, no matter what we're doing, whether it's climate change issues or taking care of a local environment or even helping, as he gives one example, a dying mother-in-law. These are things that relate directly to the whole, and if you don't see how something in the microcosm is reflective of the macrocosm, if you don't think it has anything to do with climate change and the mode of consciousness that we're implementing as a society, then you're enacting the same fragmented, um, uh, unwhole, discursive kind of thinking that has led us to this crisis in the first place. So he's really arguing that the problem, more than it is about CO2 emissions and so on, is this mode of thinking, this mode of being in the world that really has to change, and we have to really radically implement that change in the microcosm and beyond. As much as global collective projects to help the world from ecological disaster are important and shouldn't be said to be unimportant or relativized, um, the crux of it is that it is a kind of mythological internal issue as well as an external one. And I think that's sort of his main point. So that's sort of his guiding principle so far in what I've read. Another guiding principle is this principle of interbeing, which is kind of playing off this idea everything is related to everything else, but how do you really enact that? And again, this is why the book is so good, because he breaks it down topic to topic in a way that really fills in the details of our lives. I'm reminded of Dogen's work, Dogen, the Zen Buddhist. I think he established Soto Zen in Japan, where he wrote a book about cooking. It wasn't literally about cooking, but then it was about cooking. It was about how to live the principles of Zen, the enlightenment of Zen within the act and the chores of running the monastery, including cooking, how to cook mindfully in a way. And he also was famous for saying that Zazen is enlightenment, and these kind of ideas of there's no separation or there's a unity or there's a one of my favorite philosophers, Jean Gebser, calls it a diaphany, a seeing through to the whole that is present in the little things that we do with each other, for each other, and so on. So yeah, this is a good book. This is a book that I think you can read without needing to read Eisenstein's previous works. And this is a book that you can, and I think should, pass on to your friends. And as Eisenstein says in the beginning, to wrap this up, this book is a guide from the old story through the empty space between stories into a new story. It addresses the reader as a subject of this transition personally and as an agent of transition for other people, for our society, and for our planet. Like the crisis, the transition we face goes all the way to the bottom. Internally, it is nothing less than a transformation in the experience of being alive. Externally, it is nothing less than a transformation of humanity's role on planet Earth. Well, I think that just about sums it up. So here it is. The more beautiful world our hearts know is possible. Please pick it up. If I do have time, if the spirit does strike me, I'll try to write something about it. If not, I will just be sharing what I read and posting it on Evolutionary Landscapes. And so yeah, if you like this video, please rate it, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate viewers, and I hope this was a helpful review for you to make your decision to buy this book. All right, thanks. Have a nice day.